Hello everyone and welcome on back to the channel. Today we are going to be reviewing, or our first video reviewing, the new balance patch. And I'm a Guardian main and I already made a video going over the previews a few weeks ago, so I thought it best to start with the Firebrand changes. And I'm not going to leave you hanging any longer than you need to. We're going to get straight to the point, and my overall first impression and judgment of playing it for around a day or so in various modes and open world PvE and in strike missions. I've yet to take it into raids, but I'll say that I am not a fan of this change. I think it is way too convoluted. There are too many systems and barriers to actually using your abilities. The cooldowns are all off. The cooldowns of the actual abilities have been increased, but on top of the page recovery, it's just too much to juggle. And I understand that Firebrand was in need of a nerf, but it seems that their nerfs weren't necessarily in its overall power budget and its power department in terms of the raw strength of its abilities. It was the fact that you had too many abilities at your disposal at any given time. And with this rework, the hope was to corral that issue, to make it so you have to choose and you have to have more care with the abilities that you use. But with the way that it's structured and all of the gates behind it, from the amount of pages to the recharge of the pages to various traits altering how many pages you have and certain traits reducing the recharge, to the amount of pages that a certain skill costs, to the actual cooldowns of the abilities, we have about 5 systems that we're juggling, to the point where even if you're seeking to specialize in a tome, it still feels overly punishing and clunky to be specializing in a playstyle. I mean, you'll use one of your epilogue abilities, which will eat your pages, and then you might just auto attack, take a healer. Like, all you're going to be doing is using your epilogue and your auto attack because that's the most reliable way to heal. So it leaves you with 3 other abilities where previously, depending on the situation, you might want to use it. You might find more use in it and feel like it's less punishing to use. But now that there are so many systems that you are taking into consideration, and you still have 2 other tomes at your disposal, it feels very limiting, and it feels like you're compelled to only use 1 or 2 of the abilities within a certain tome and then immediately drop out of it so that your pages can begin to recover. And of course you have the page recovery system, but then if you get those pages, you might pop back in and then realize that that one ability that you're looking to use still has 10 seconds left, 5 seconds left to go, and you're like, okay, well, let me just wait, let me drop out, let me come back in, and then eventually you'll be able to use it. I don't know about you, but the whole concept of specializing does sound very attractive. We've seen both iterations of Firebrand having access to 3 tomes with cooldowns on those tomes, and now, granted, we have just begun to experience this Firebrand rework system of pages and initiative and cooldowns. But honestly, one was maybe a little overpowered, and this one, from just day 1 of playing, feels incredibly difficult to use. It feels like an incredible migraine is about to happen. It doesn't feel intuitive, and I can't see that getting any better if I'm being honest. It's like I've already spent so much time with it, and I've been looking around on the Reddit and the forums, and it seems like the sentiment is not just on me. It seems to be kind of a shared impression. Now, if they increase the number of base tome pages, if they reduce the cooldowns, then we'll kind of be back where we're started, to the point where Firebrand is too overpowered because of the amount of abilities that you have. And I gotta say, I am more confident than ever in proposing the idea of at least entertaining a rework where it is 1 tome that you choose, and perhaps you have pages act as an energy building system rather than an energy spending system. In a way, having a 3rd weapon kit in the form of your tome of choice might actually be more reliable, and you can utilize it as if it was a 3rd weapon. Considering all of the cooldown increases and the alterations to abilities that have been done in this patch, it seems like they were treating the tomes as if they were a weapon that you would reliably be using, because they did buff up a lot of the cooldowns, because you don't want all of these abilities to be on 10-second cooldowns. But like in a way of doing that, they're treating it like it is a weapon, but it's also not a weapon that is reliable, because you have this very limited energy spending system. It's a lot. So I would propose to kind of go back to the drawing board and really hone in on what the issue of Firebrand was innately. The lack of specialization and the lack of decision making when it comes to a profession mechanic that gives you, as it is now, 15 abilities. And for some people, you might say, but what about versatility? What about bringing that aspect of you can kind of tackle multiple situations? I have to just sigh, and I have to point out that you have a utility bar for a reason. You have mantras for a reason. The Firebrand's mantras and the utility bar innately have been designed to give you a lot of flexibility in terms of the boons that you provide, in terms of the damaging or controlling effects that you bring. The elite mantra is allowing you to break stuns on yourself and allies around you. Even mantras themselves could theoretically receive another rework, because they're, in a way, extremely powerful as instant cast abilities. But I digress, I won't get onto that too much. And I have to go against this thought that Firebrand is only fun because of the immense amount of skills that it has on its profession mechanic. And that by taking that versatility away, it will remove versatility from Guardian as a whole, considering we have utility skills, and that is the whole reason they're there. But having versatility innately is a part of Guild Wars 2. You have a weapon swap, you have utility skills, you have 3 specializations, but adding 15 skills on every Firebrand at any given time seemed to be the core issue with its design, and removing that cooldown with this rework was really cool, because you're able to spend more time in each of the tomes, but then they had to, have another way to balance around that. And I just think if you rework this and you just make it to where a Firebrand has their F1 ability, and you have a little carrot, very much like a Revenant Legend. You press the carrot, you right-click on it, and you choose the tome that you want to use, and then, very similar to Bladesworn's, when you're using your F1, it acts as a third weapon that you can reliably specialize in. And then they're able, and you have the opportunity, to actually flesh out each tome to really hone in on what it is, differentiate the patterns of attacks, do more wild and weird things with it. I don't know. I've always loved Firebrand. I've always loved Guardian. And this was the one specialization that allowed me to play a healer. But now, even while healing, it feels very clunky. And I've seen a lot of people say that damage is being hit hard, and I'm not doubting that at all. But in the same breath, people are like, oh, healing is fine. I've been playing it, and I don't know if healing in that playstyle is fine. I find it to be extremely boring, repetitive, and once you get down to the lower page costs, you feel like you are just in a hold. You're bound to just waiting for that one extra page to charge so that you can do 3 casts of your chapter 1, or you can use your epilogue and then chapter 1, but then you're out of pages. So it feels, once you're in the combat scenario, it becomes extremely boring. Your opener gives you a lot of fun. It gives you more time to use multiple abilities, but then once you're past that opening part of the fight, you're left with 1 to 2 pages, and you're just like, what do I do? And so, yeah, this is not the rework that Firebrand needed, in my opinion. This is not the way to go to treat essentially kits along with an initiative system. I made this analogy back when we got the preview, where it was like, oh, engineer, you have all of these kits available. However, you only have 5 uses, and they're all shared. And also, some of those abilities will use 2 or 3 charges. Good luck. And that's how it feels. Once you're in combat, you're like, good luck. Well, how am I supposed to feel like I'm specializing in something if I can't even use it. So I really find this rework to be unfortunate. But I'm not one to suggest such grandiose changes without at least throwing my hat in the ring and showing my effort when it comes to these concepts. So let's head on over to the other segment where I will now reveal the long-mentioned Firebrand rework that I've concocted if you only chose one tome. So I'll see you over there. Hello everyone, and welcome on over to this section where I'm going to finally show off my Firebrand rework idea, and this will be kind of a bit more of a faster walkthrough, but if you ever want to just look at some fan-made tool tips, feel free to pause at any given point and read, and I'd love to hear your own thoughts about how perhaps Firebrand could be readjusted if we did not get this rework. But let me first talk about the mechanic of the actual tome, and here we'll show this off in Resolve. Essentially, this would be like your F1 and your F2. The F2 would actually be the epilogue, a special skill that is utilizing the energy that you build up. So very much akin to Bladesworn, where your F1 is your weapon and your F2 is your special profession mechanic ability that utilizes your resource. So in theory, your F1 would be of your own free choice, where you right-click it, you click the caret, and you choose which tome that you want. Each tome, despite it being F1, would still respectively act as Virtue Skill 1, Virtue Skill 2, or Virtue Skill 3, but then your F2 will change depending on that virtue. And as we can see here with this example of Resolve, if you're in Resolve, you would get access to Epilogue Eternal Oasis. But we'll come back to Resolve in but a moment. Let's start with Justice, of course. So with the idea of using a tome as a third weapon, it allows you to do more fun things and kind of tailor it to a specific play style rather than it being a copied format between all three tomes. And B, with this rework, it's opened up a fifth ability, that being Chapter 5. So I get to play around with some more fun things. And also C, it allows you to better tailor what that role is doing and what those boons are providing, and how the role to the boon is associated. So let's talk about Justice. First and foremost, an auto attack of 1200 range, focusing on burning and the final attack being vulnerability, adding more animation, adding a little bit more visual variety with an auto attack cast rather than it just being a cone. We see a lot of those on the mantras and all the other tomes as well. Chapter 2, I like the idea of a skill being kind of named after the expansion that it was brought in with Path of Flame, kind of reminiscent to Path of Fire, but kind of similar in theory to like what the auto attack usually is right now, with it being a conal road attack. Heated Rebuke. The damaged tome does have crowd control, which I don't mind. However, I find there's so much hard CC, so I'm typically try to avoid that at any given time when kind of giving feedback or when it's not necessarily needed. So Heated Rebuke, this would do damage slow and provide quickness. This is where we first see an idea of tying the roll to the boon a little bit more tightly so that it creates a better LFG experience and it sets up expectation for players. So yeah, damage slow, quickness to allies, and still will do defiance damage. And we've seen an ability like this on Necromancer, and I think this could be rather interesting so that we could cull away hard CC effects in favor of potentially more soft CC effects such as slow and chill and fear and all that stuff. Spellfire is relatively the same, maybe a target location so you can activate this from range. And then the new ability that I thought of, kind of like pulling from the divinity of Balthazar and whatnot, summon the divine flame of the war god. This would be like a location where it's a flame column of damage and extra burning and vulnerability. Also quickness application, maybe even might, your epilogue, your F2 of Justice. This could theoretically be your F2, your epilogue, Ashes of the Just. Recall the memory of the fallen heroes, granting allies the searing blades of justice, and might, it says might here, consuming more pages empowers the effect. I think at one point I thought this would have been might, but I swapped it to quickness and didn't update it. But this also could be 1 second of quickness and 1 stack of might per page used or something. Now let's get into Resolve. The fun thing with Resolve is if this ends up in this rework being a third weapon, it needs a little bit of damage. So I've totally reworked the Chapter 1 ability. I've transformed this into Holy Light, essentially having an attack function and an ally target function. Also kind of pulling from the Virtuoso, where if you strike an enemy or an ally 3 times, it will play a special effect. And for the sake of Resolve being healing focused, it will play an area heal around that target. So striking an enemy 3 times will eventually pop an AoE heal. Healing an ally target 3 times will then share out another AoE heal around them. So kind of very reminiscent with that. I love Virtuoso's complexity and iteration on combat, so I kind of pulled from that. Radiant Recovery being the same, increased the radius though. Azure Sun, with this being more of a reliable weapon, I thought you had to bring a bit more use to each of these abilities, so I added a little bit of a blind, and once again, tailoring that boon to the role of being healing. So I've added Alacrity, 2, could be 3 seconds of Alacrity now that I'm looking at it, but just a little bit of something to kind of play that healer. So Firebrand healers would have the domain of Alacrity. Damage Firebrands, specifically, quick Firebrands, would have that domain of quickness. So yeah, a little bit of separation, a little bit more use with each of the specific roles and specializations within the Firebrand. New 4th ability, Shining Beacon. Took inspiration from Astral Wisp, and like to have a little bit of something else with this because there was a free spell slot because of the epilogue being moved to the F2. So yeah, Shining Beacon, summon a beacon on a target, healing, Alacrity generation in a 360 radius, something a bit more active so that you can be targeting an ally or an enemy, taking homage to what the 4th ability currently is, Light's Rapture, release, healing and swiftness, kind of an old iteration where this ability of Shining River actually used to be a big burst heal rather than healing over time. I do think this could probably have damage on it as well, because it's like your most powerful ability, a little something extra. And then Epilogue, Eternal Oasis, increasing your healing per page used, but also extending supportive boons per page used, so increasing the duration of regeneration, vigor, and alacrity, rewarding you for applying those boons through Azure Sun, Shining Beacon, and then extending them. A nice way to mesh the skills together. And then we come to Courage, where you can really do a lot of fun ideas with Courage, because Courage doesn't have really any attacking abilities other than the second skill, and if this was a weapon, you'd have to have an auto attack chain. Also peep the icons that I used, bringing back a lot of old icons that we don't see anymore. But yeah, basic attack, because it's a bit more defensive, I thought of throwing barrier and protection on this. Your second ability, Daring Challenge, I've always believed, more recently now actually, is that Taunt is probably better suited to being a PvE only condition and could probably have a lot of use. And in competitive modes, Taunt could be swapped to Slow or Weakness. So Daring Challenge, I brought up the Taunt, I changed the resolution to Resistance, and I changed in competitive modes this to Slow. Your third ability, the one ability where I've decided to input a new skill, we have Liberator's Wrath. This would be a bit more damaging, strike damage focused control element. You're doing a combo to slow, and then you kind of summon a big hammer to daze or whatever. Very Guardian-esque. And I moved Valiant Bulwark over to 4. This would create the reflection bubble, but also on the initial cast would grant stability to allies. And then the fifth ability, Stalwart Stand. This is your big circle spell effect. I've just buffed this up a lot as your big statement ability for the virtue. Engrave a large area in fortifying magic, pulsing barrier, protection, resolution, and resistance. And then, of course, Epilogue, Unbroken Lines. Instead of this being toughness, I thought reducing damage per page so that it's a bit more applicable to everyone in most scenarios and not just scaling toughness. So, yeah, minus 10% incoming damage per page used, and then you're also granting might and stability per page used in a bigger radius. I must say that I increased the radius for all of these epilogue skills. So those are my ideas in terms of how a virtue could act if it was its own weapon, really honing in on what that virtue is playing and what role that it is providing, and seeking to differentiate it and actually create a unique playstyle, because not every book is the same, but in Guild Wars 2, every tome book is the same in terms of how it is read. It goes cone, circle, targeted circle, bigger circle around you, and then your final buff, big circle. And I think that's a bit of a boring, a bit of a safe way of playing it, so I like to push the mold a little bit. And while we're here, let's talk about mantras. Mantras I find to be lacking in identity and a bit overpowered in their current iteration. And I've always missed those old Firebrand mantra spell effects and animations. If you are just picking up the game, you won't ever see these, but if you were back in Path of Fire, you know how it was like to charge your mantras. And I think charging of mantras is a really cool idea. Not charging them in order to use a spell effect, but charging them where that charge is in and of itself the spell effect. We've seen a lot of abilities back in the alpha of Guild Wars 2 play around with this concept. They're not really on attack abilities anymore, but we still see them on elements like the trebuchet.
So he's using a skill right there that's a charge skill. So the longer he holds that down, the more ice shards it throws out. There are a lot of
where the longer you hold it down, the further it will go, the more damage it will do. And I think mantras are the perfect skill type to really play around with that idea and differentiate it from something like a cantrip where it's just an instant cast spell and super easy, a little bit of preparation and idea where you can still spam it to get an instant effect, but it'll be weaker. But if you actually want to get a better reward for it, you would hold it down. So something like Mantra of Solace, you get a self-heal initially, but the longer you hold it down, you were able to heal for more for everyone in the area, of course granting protection. Mantra of Flame, the longer you hold it down, the more burning you do. Mantra of Lore, the longer you hold it down, the more conditions that are cleansed. Mantra of Truth, longer you hold it down, the more damage you would deal, and for each interval that you hold it down internally, like it would check a box that you reached a threshold, you would then apply a different controlling condition. I've also changed Mantra of Potence because of the way that I've structured the boons with the actual tomes, and once we get into the traits, you'll see that as well. But for Mantra of Potence, I've shifted this to be a bit more of a stronger healing and boon sharing. It also brings us to the final mantra. I was thinking like, okay, so the final mantra is a stun break. It can't really have a channel, but let's kind of push this beyond perhaps. And I like this, but maybe some people like having the mantra of liberation be a consistent stun break. I totally get it. But I was thinking, if we like play around with the tomes. So having a mantra that changes depending on the tome that you are using, really being this elite concept of a mantra for the Firebrand. So I renamed it to the mantra of Archivist. Depending on the tome that you're using, you have a different effect. Your Tome of Justice will apply damage, bleeding, and burning while granting quickness around you. 2 charges on a 30-second cooldown. If you're using your Tome of Resolve, it will give an area heal and alacrity while breaking your stuns. And then if you're using your Tome of Courage, this is where you get your AoE stun break. So this would then not only break your stun, but break the stuns on everyone else, granting them some barrier and a stack of stability. And for the sake of this video, let's talk about the traits. I really wanted to get to the core of Purity of Purpose and focusing in on the different play styles. A miner's first, Swift Scholar. Equipping your tome grants you the respective boon. Once again, playing with that boon to that role. If you're in Justice, you'll get Quickness. If you're in Resolve, you'll get Alacrity. If you're in Courage, you'll get Resistance. Imbued Knowledge, giving you buffs for being in your tome. Tome of Justice, if you have that, you're gaining condition damage. If you're in Resolve, you're getting Healing Power. And if you're in Courage, you're gaining Vitality to help you survive a bit longer. Let's talk about the Adepts. And I really wanted to focus on Purity of Purpose. Skills gain a chance to inflict bleeding. I bumped this up to 40%. This could probably be 45 or 50%. And then Symbol of Vengeance. Instead of dazing, it now theoretically would summon 2 ghostly axes within its symbol to deal extra bleeding damage, to really focus in on that pure Connie damage playstyle. Liberator's Vow actually has something to do with Swift Scholar. This would be your trait that you would take to then share and emphasize your boon sharing playstyle if you happen to be a healer or if you happen to be the quickness provider for that group, that quick Firebrand. Swift Scholar will now apply to allies around you, granting the boon of the tome you are using. So this would then share out that boon of Swift Scholar depending on the tome that you have. Archivist of Whisper is going to be changed to play around with this proposed energy idea. So you are always going to be gaining energy while you are using your tome, and you're gaining more energy for damaging or healing targets. Very similar to Celestial Avatar on Druid. This will buff that up a little bit more. Gain Tome energy even when not using your Virtue Tome. Tome energy gained is increased while you're in your Virtue Tome. So instead of like 1 energy per second while being in the Tome, it's now 2 energy per second. And even if you're outside of your Tome, like using your normal weapons, you'd still be gaining that energy throughout very slowly, but it's something to increase your access of your epilogue ability in theory. Terms, I like to see this kind of like updated a little bit. Your mantra skills slow nearby foes. Whenever you release the charge, you deal increased strike damage to slowed foes, emphasizing that capitalization on controlled enemies. Scribe support. Healing allies is improved when at greater distances. Alacrity also grants you healing power. I like the idea of those abilities or those traits, specifically on Dragon Hunter, where you deal increased damage depending on your range thresholds. And I find it so sad that we don't have that for healing. It's like a very like 1-to-1, one's doing damage, one's correcting the damage, healing. So I like that idea. So I transformed legendary lore and kind of put it into each of the Grandmasters, but we'll get to that. So I had kind of a free trait, but thought maybe a bit more condition damage. When you burn a target, bleed them. Bleeding deals increased damage. This could be buffed up though, like this could be 4 seconds of bleed and plus 20% damage instead of 15, you know, all that stuff. And let's go to the Grandmasters. I actually really love what they did with the Grandmasters in this patch and kind of took a lot of inspiration from that, but added onto it with the concept of legendary lore, the trait that we currently have in the game, but just kind of like slotted each of the effects into this Grandmaster here. So Stoic Demeanor, retain courage, passive effect while in your tome. Regardless of the tome that you're taking, you could be taking your F1 and you'd still gain your passive effect of your virtue of courage, which allows you to have a little bit more flexibility with all of these Grandmasters. So retain courage, passive effect while in your tome. When you control or slow a foe, fortify allies around you. Barrier resistance and protection. Quickfire, retain justice passive effect while in your tome, any tome that you're in. Burning you apply lasts longer, and granting quickness to allies gives them a stack of Ashes of the Just, further increasing your condition damage. So even if you're playing a healer and you're using a Tome of Resolve, you could be taking Quickfire, interest in your decisions, and then Lore Master, retain Resolve passive effect while in your tome. Regen you apply is stronger and heals them up front for an amount. So we don't really have a regen increasing trait on Guardian, and this being the last trait to be more support oriented, I thought this would be a good place to put it. And additionally, I wanted to buff this up as it is a Grandmaster, so having a concept of when you grant regen, you apply a little packet of healing. This would probably be like really minor, like 80 healing, but if you have more healing power, it would then climb to like 200, 300 healing, so on and so forth. So yeah, that is my total rework. I think the rework that I'm probably the most comfortable with in terms of like how tomes would work if they were their own weapon kits, and mantras having a little bit more of a unique identity in the pool of different utility categories. And yeah, that's my overall wrap up of Firebrand. I still am gonna be like playing around with Firebrand that we currently have, but I don't know. I'm not really feeling this. I would love to see what they could do, what Firebrand could be if your tome was instead essentially like a blade sworn weapon, where you're actually using your tomes as a weapon and you are mastering a book and a source of magic, and you don't feel super cramped by the tome page initiative system, and you're not feeling cramped by the recharge system, and you're not feeling cramped by the actual abilities having longer cooldowns. I think that we could probably have a better version of Firebrand. So I would love to see a second pass with what they could come up with Firebrand. This is what I came up with. And thank you so much for coming on by. Like the video if you liked it. Comment below your thoughts in regards to Firebrand and all of the reworks. Other elements of this balance patch. More videos are coming with the Reaper especially. So thank you all so much for coming on by. If you'd like to support the channel, head on over to Patreon. If you'd like to catch me streaming over on Twitch, I stream there every day of the week, usually around 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. And I will catch you all in the next video. Bye everyone. Mwah.